años formando profesionales.
Escuchas Unimpau Radio 88.3 FM.
El mundo tiene alrededor de 7.000 millones de habitantes. 3.200 millones de personas tienen acceso a Internet, lo cual equivale al 40% de la población mundial. 2.000 millones utilizan redes móviles para navegar y 35 de cada 100 habitantes tienen una conexión de más de 5 megas de velocidad. Si estás aquí, es porque haces parte de esta población. Es tu mejor compañía. Por eso, no te desconectes. Conectes. Unimpau Radio tiene para ti un programa que te mantendrá sincronizado con lo que pasa en la web y el mundo de la tecnología. Sky 3. Todos los viernes de 5 a 7 p.m. hora Colombia. Conduce Juan David Oyuela.
La Universidad de la Radio ya está al aire. Escuchas Unimpau Radio.
Tu piel roja radio. Deportes, actualidad, datos, viajes, anécdotas, entrevistas, concursos. Todo lo que te apasiona en un solo lugar. Tu piel roja radio, lunes a viernes, 12 a 1 de la tarde.
Unimpau Radio.
Y escuchen bien, porque es la última vez que les enseño. Ahí va.
Todos los jueves de 1 a 2 de la tarde, a Unimpau Radio llega numeral modo relax.
Solo en ese lugar está toda la música que nos gusta, desde el pop, rock, electrónica, reggae, reggaetón. Toda la información de Impau y el resto del mundo está aquí, solo en numeral modo relax. Modo relax.
Escuchas Unimpau Radio 88.3 FM.
From Bogota, this is Dispatch Colombia. I'm Desmond Bastide with the latest news and views from across the country for audiences around the world.
Dispatch Colombia.
You're listening to Dispatch Colombia. Hello and welcome to Dispatch Colombia, and thanks for joining us on our podcast today. Well, as Venezuela falls further into a humanitarian disaster of economic collapse and political repression, more of its citizens are fleeing a country which once served as a haven for economic migrants and political refugees from around the world. But for many, the easiest destination to flee is to its neighbour here in Colombia, just across the porous and largely unprotected border. Now, the UN Refugee Agency puts the figure at about 300,000 this year, but the Association of Venezuelans in Colombia reckons there are about 1.2 million Venezuelans now living in the country of around 4 million.
Begging, selling like chewing gum, cigarettes on the street, asking for work. It really, I mean, you talk to people there and they all say it. Before San Antonio, which is this small border town on the other side of the bridge in Venezuela, they would say, oh, it's like a barrio of Cúcuta, a neighborhood of Cúcuta. Whereas now they kind of view it as being like the Cúcuta is kind of part of Venezuela almost.
So the types of people that are coming over, are they mostly people from very deprived areas of Venezuela, or are they a spectrum of people with good education seeking economic migrants, or are they really people that are hungry?
I mean, you see everything, and well, one of the main things about what's happening in Venezuela right now is that, I mean, we can talk about economic migrants, but when your salary, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, doesn't allow you to buy food, then to me, that you're not migrating because of economic circumstances in the same sense, because you're hungry. That affects you, whether you have. To me, an economic migrant is someone who, say, like I'm from the UK. I moved to Switzerland because maybe I can get a better job that pays better in Switzerland. Those guys are moving from Venezuela to eat, and you hear it from doctors who can't make rent, who can't feed their kids, who have lost weight. And you see it from people at the lower end of the economic spectrum who are less educated. There really is the whole spectrum from uneducated or poorly educated to well educated with postgrad degrees are coming over, because the lack of food, the lack of medicine, the rampant inflation, which is at about 1,000% and going up. It's not letting up. It's not allowing anyone like a look in.
So we talked about the introduction there that there's a concern in Colombia that this is going to get only worse. And is there a sense that the Colombian government have a handle on this?
There's a sense that they're getting one with recent measures. They recently announced a kind of a temporary permit for people that come over. That will last a couple of years. Like that suggests they're getting some kind of handle on it. But realistically, I mean, there's only so much government that has never had a great control of that border anyway, that can do. And also, there's this changing dynamic which makes it very hard for the Colombian government to take control. Is that for 50 years, Colombians have forced you back to the border. There's two as well. One allows them to stay and work in that region, and the other just allows them to come and go. Which is because you have two types of kind of migration going on there. You have some that live between Venezuela and Colombia, that live on the border in Venezuela and cross over. Maybe they have a construction gig they can work on, or maybe they have informal, of course. And most of the work, all of this work that I'm talking about now, is informal. And they come over to buy stuff. Whereas the other track is these guys that arrived before July this year and overstayed they had their passport stamped. They weren't here informally, and they weren't doing informal work or anything like that. Or well, they might have been, but we wouldn't know. It's informal, but they're not known to have done that. They now can can apply for a new thing which lets them stay for another 2 years and look for formal work. So there's sort of a gentle path to not citizenship, but to some sort of residency.
It could be argued, though, that doing something like that would see a situation like what happened in Germany with the Syrian refugees, where people think that there's an opportunity to stay, so they won't be turned back. I read that it's around 1,500 were deported last year, but if you have a policy like we were just talking about, that you're actually certifying residency, does that not encourage more Venezuelans to come over? So what I'm trying to say really is the Colombian government seems comfortable with the idea at the moment of these refugees crossing the border. Would that be because of historical exchanges from the other way around for many years, do you think?
Well, I don't know how comfortable they are with it. They will always seem comfortable because obviously diplomatic relations between the two countries are fraught at best, and there's this ongoing kind of thing between the two countries that where they're always kind of trying to make it look like their country's the better one,
right?
And they're very good at that, and so they have that sense of looking inviting. But then there's the card, the visa, let's call it, that lets them stay for 2 years and work, is only available if they'd already moved. So kind of technically that shouldn't draw more people, but of course it's going to if they just see it, because no one reads the small print like that. They'll just see, oh, they're giving out work permits to Venezuelans. So I think it will, like what happened in Germany, more will come. But I also think that they were going to come anyway in a lot of cases. I mean, human rights crackdown over there is getting worse, inflation is getting worse, political oppression is getting worse. So there's just more reasons for people to leave.
I saw one of the articles you wrote that there's a solidarity with, just forget about the government, but people at the border themselves, solidarity with Venezuelans moving over. Can you just elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, well, that was one of the positive things I saw when I was there, is there are large groups of Colombians, large numbers of Colombians that are helping the Venezuelans out, that are giving them work, that are giving up rooms in their houses.
When you say giving up rooms, are they paying for these rooms, or are they being offered to them free initially anyway?
Some I spoke to were being offered them free, and some were paying, but paying what they could. There's also some kind of Colombian churches there that are feeding people every day. So there is you hear a lot, especially in Bogota, I'm sure you've heard it too, where people are kind of wary of Venezuelans coming in. In the same way, in any mass migration, there's always people that are worried about who's coming in, who's taking our jobs, and all of this sort of stuff. And you do hear that, but it was really refreshing in Cúcuta to see so many examples where Colombians are welcoming. You know, they have that attitude that we're all human beings, and as well, it comes back to that thing you mentioned in the introduction, that so many Colombians went over there, and so for Venezuela to have received Colombians in need, a lot of them, these are the exact same people. They then feel down the line, right now it's my turn to receive some Venezuelans and to make them feel welcome.
You mentioned there that there is, and I've definitely experienced it as well, it's a slow murmur, I would say, at the moment about Bogotans speaking about the fact that there's a lot coming in at the moment. It's very difficult, but I hope it doesn't get too bad. It's still, I suppose, because there's such a similarity in accent in the people themselves between the two countries, it's hard to tell a difference. So it's unlikely that there'll be a racism element kicking into the situation maybe down the line that there would have been in other situations, say for example in Europe.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the fact that the two countries are kind of ethnically on the same plane means you're not going to have racism as an issue. I think the issues are much more just people worried about not having a job themselves, or not having a job for their kids, that Venezuelans are going to come and take. It's a nationalistic thing. It's not a racial thing.
And from speaking to people at the border, what was your impression of the Venezuelans that were coming across, and their expectations, and also the feeling that they got from crossing the border and planning to make a life? Was that something that you found, that people were actually crossing that border for the last time, for the foreseeable future, and there was no plans to return?
Well, yeah, a lot were crossing without any plan to return, at least until things get better, which they don't foresee. That's why they're taking the decision. But I didn't get that kind of sense you get in films where the boat arrives at the Statue of Liberty and all the immigrants are like, yeah, we have a new life, it's all going to be great. They know they're arriving to somewhere where there isn't much work, where there is violence, where there is technically a war still going on. They know that they're not showing up in New York and to a country that's that's welcoming them with open arms. So there is an anxiety and a sadness. But I mean, I don't like to generalize, but a lot of the people I met did have an incredible kind of work ethic and kind of joie de vivre to kind of carry on, to muscle on, and to make the best of whatever they can. A fair few that I spoke to, and I spoke to for about 100 in the course of that week or 10 days that I was there. Some just in passing, and some for longer, over a coffee or whatever. And some want to get to the US, some want to get down to Argentina, to Ecuador. They're a lot of their plans aren't necessarily Colombia. Colombia, because its economy is not great, because its conflict situation isn't ideal, especially in the sort of poorer areas where they're likely to live, especially on the border. they want to move further on. But their attitude is, their outlook is kind of positive, but that's not to say that they're kind of happy and sort of fist bumping each other.
Sure. There is a history of Venezuelans travelling all over the world, and some of the other countries that have been dealing with this, Brazil, Argentina, but a history, one of the articles I've been reading, that Argentina has a close cooperation with Venezuela for many years, so it's not an actual new thing to have Venezuelans drifting into that country in a sense.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And I mean, other countries in Latin America are used to receiving immigrants of any kind. In Chile, there's a large Venezuelan part of the Venezuelan diaspora. In Argentina, there's a German diaspora. So in Brazil, there's a little Italy in Rio and stuff like that. Well, I'm assuming there is. So these countries are used to receiving immigrants in general, whereas Colombia just isn't. That's the kind of the main difference. That's why it's affecting Colombia's kind of state support system so much.
We'll go into that in a moment, but Colombia sent a delegation to, I understand, Turkey to understand about the Syrian crisis. Now, obviously, there's no contrast between the two, no comparison, I should say, between both countries in the crisis stakes at the moment. But they did go there to learn how they were coping with such an influx. And do you think that we could see down the line these large tented areas on the border between Colombia and Venezuela if things keep getting worse in Venezuela?
I mean, we're talking there about a worst case scenario. I mean, refugee camps is kind of I think it's undignified. It's cruel, and oftentimes, kind of civilization just fails in a lot of these camps where the desperation is so total. I don't think we're looking at that now. Obviously, worst case scenario, say millions and millions pour over, then that could happen. But I personally don't see the Venezuelans arriving in larger movements than they are already. I see it's going to be a steady movement going on until more and more people just say this is enough, because you're not dealing with like in the Middle East, in Syria, where a city can be destroyed over a weekend, and then you've got 300,000-400,000 people that have to move. There, it's not so urgent, the need to move, and if you're hungry, you can endure hunger a little bit longer. If you're ill, if you need medicine, you can maybe hold off on getting that medicine before you need to leave.
You're listening to Dispatch Colombia. You're listening to Dispatch Colombia. If you have a story you would like us to cover, get in touch by emailing us at dispatchcolombia@gmail.com.
Escuchas Unimpau Radio 88.3 FM. Transmite desde Colombia y para el mundo entero. Unimpau Radio. Escúchanos www.impau.tv y en frecuencia modulada 88.3 FM. Escuchas Unimpau Radio. Música, variedad y noticias. Unimpau Radio, la radio virtual de la Fundación Universitaria Impau.
Estás escuchando Dispatch Colombia por Unimpau Radio.
Unimpau vive en la era digital. Utiliza tu correo institucional y sé parte de nuestra comunidad. No olvides escribir tu nombre completo, cédula y, si eres estudiante, el programa académico al correo dit@unimpau.edu.co.
This is Dispatch Colombia. Join Desmond Bustede every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Impow Radio with the latest news and views from across the country for audiences around the world. Dispatch Colombia por Impow Radio.
Estás escuchando Unimpau Radio.
Sé lo que quiero. En 5 años me voy a ganar mi primer premio Simón Bolívar. Por eso decidí estudiar Comunicación Social y Periodismo en la Universidad Unimpau.
Estudia en la Universidad Unimpau, la primera escuela tecnológica en periodismo de América Latina. Llámanos al 332-3500. Con Unimpau lo puedes lograr.
Institución de Educación Superior sujeta a inspección y vigilancia por el Ministerio de Educación Nacional.
You're listening to Dispatch Colombia. If you have a story you would like us to cover, get in touch by emailing us at dispatchcolombia@gmail.com.
Unimpau Fundación Universitaria te ofrece un programa técnico profesional, 10 carreras tecnológicas y 3 carreras universitarias. Ingresa unimpau.edu.co o en Twitter @Unimpau o llama a la línea 332-3500. Unimpau, 40 años formando profesionales.
El profe nos envió un trabajo al correo institucional y yo no lo tengo.
Tranquila, Estefa, es muy fácil activarlo. Simplemente envías un correo a la dirección dit@unimpau.edu.co con tu nombre completo, número de cédula y listo.
¡Guau! Es facilísimo. Ahora usaré mi correo institucional y seré @unimpau.edu.co.
Estás escuchando Dispatch Colombia por Unimpau Radio. Hello and welcome back to Dispatch Colombia. Thanks for joining us today on the program. We have journalist Joe Parkin Daniels. We're speaking about the refugee crisis that's developing. Many refugees travelling across the border from Venezuela here into Colombia, and we were just talking about the different types of people that have been crossing. Just in your experience, Joe Parkin Daniels, what stories have you heard from the people actually crossing the border, and just give us some sense of the lives that have been changed really as a result of this crisis in Venezuela?
Okay, sure. Well, going at the kind of the most severe of the stories I heard, there was a kid who was like about 20 or something. He's a student, and he was one of the leaders in the recent protests. And he was kind of filmed being at the front of one of the marches, and so the next day he arrives at work, he's arrested, taken to a building, he doesn't know what it is, and is tortured for 12 hours, then thrown in a cell for a number of weeks.
When you say tortured, what kind of things did he say happened to him?
Beatings, a lot of kind of psychological abuse, threats against his family. In physical terms, it was a lot of beatings.
Okay.
With fists and with sticks, like a sort of small metal pole, is what he said. And so he was tortured, and he was thrown in a cell for a few weeks. Eventually got out, and obviously fled straight away, and now he's asking for asylum. So that's the kind, and you hear those stories. You hear in Cucuta, and you hear in the media as well.
So just on, you said he led a protest. What protest? I know we can see from some of the television footage this protest's ongoing, but for people that don't understand, he is against socialism, or he's just pretty much against the fact that they can't buy food in the shops.
Yeah, well, that's one of the excuse me. That's one of the difficult issues you have in Venezuela with its kind of opposition. Is a lot don't know whether they're against socialism or against kind of left-wing or left-leaning politics, or if they're just against the situation that it's led them to in that moment. And so a lot find themselves siding with an opposition which is incredibly right-wing, and which also maybe they don't actually align to if things were more normal. This guy, he was against socialism as he explained it, which was the kind of Venezuelan model of socialism.
Okay.
Which to other people is not socialism at all. It's state-run capitalism. To other people, there's so many ways you can describe it. But my interpretation is of what he was telling me is that on a normal kind of, say, a UK spectrum, he would be kind of somewhere solidly in the centre, maybe slightly to the right. But he was more protesting against the lack of food, the lack of medicine, and the oppression, which he was then a victim of.
It's very hard, I think, for any of us to understand how bad things are there, but can you give some sense of, we can see the pictures and people are protesting, but what are their lives like from the ones that have crossed? What have they told you?
So from the ones that have crossed, they say that in Caracas especially, the crime is rampant. Every night you're hearing gunshots. You don't leave the house after dark. You don't leave the house in the day if you don't have to. In terms of getting food, you're lining up for hours and hours, risking being robbed in some cases. A lot of people, because the inflation is so bad, you need the kind of a suitcase full of notes to buy whatever food they have available. And so there's a lot of kind of worrying about how they're going to get the money to actually pay for things. I'm hearing recently from a colleague that's there that now it's very difficult to get money out of cash machines. It's, walking around with dollars could lead to you getting in trouble with the authorities if they find you.
Because dollars they're actually used as a currency in Venezuela at the moment in the black market. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there, if you have dollars, they would bite your hand off for them. It's a currency they can actually use when they get out of the country. They can earn as much as they want there. What 5 years ago would have been a salary. It would have been a whole year's salary. They could earn that in a month, and it would still only last them a couple of weeks in Colombia, which is not known for being the most expensive country in the world. So yeah, the dollars are exactly what they're after.
And just going back to the gent that you were talking that was tortured, did he have a real sense of anger about what was happening? He was tortured for a number of days in a jail. He felt he had to leave because his life and his family's life was in danger. What was his emotional state like?
Oh, well, furious. He is what the international kind of a convention of 52 or 53 on refugees. He falls under that bracket because he has experienced direct political persecution, and he's furious about it. He feels he's lost his country. He doesn't know when he can go back, if he can ever go back, and he's worried as well. I mean, he has family there.
When you said that they threatened to hurt his family, did he have any contact with them after he had left, or was he able to tell you that?
Yeah, no, he's had contact. They're fine. Thankfully, they didn't live up to the threats.
All right.
But he's still worried about it. But he still talks to them back there. He phones them when he can.
And what about some of the other people that you met? Some of the other stories?
So a lot of other stories. A lot of the stories you hear are just a perfectly normal, middle class family. They run a shop or something like that, and they can no longer afford to feed their children. I remember one family of 4, young family. The mother and father were in their mid-20s, early 20s, and 2 young children. And they were saying we'd lived there, we'd endured this crisis since it began for about 2 or 3 years ago when the shortages started, and we could go hungry, we could go without food, and cut down only like half your recommended calories or whatever a day, and make do. But when they started seeing their children losing weight and started seeing malnutrition in their children, then they're like, right, now we have to go. And that's a story I heard a few times. And what happens then is they sell all their stuff. They have a car, they sell it. They have a house, they usually leave that to whatever family. A lot of the older members of the family stay behind because, you know, once you're very senior, you're not going to want to relocate to another country, especially like Colombia. It's not the retirement they maybe planned, so they stay behind, and but otherwise, yeah, they go, all the money goes on getting here really, and then at the border, they change it to Colombian pesos, which they then realise doesn't get them that far.
Just talking about the non-existent, I suppose you could say, social welfare system in Colombia. I mean, if you don't have money in your back pocket crossing that border, there is really no help other than churches. There's no state-run agency that will help you out, really, is there?
No, it's that's the cold hard truth of it. Once if you arrive, I mean, they're starting to roll in these systems, these migratory permits and stuff like that. The border one, that will give them some access, but if you don't have money, there's really not much of a social net. I mean, there's not a social net for Colombians without money.
Yeah.
So for Venezuelans, it's even worse.
I know that you've been a number of years in the country yourself, in Colombia. Just over the last 3 years, between I suppose there's been the peace process and some social changes here over the last number of years. Have you seen Colombia change in that time, in the 3 years? Have you lived it in a sense?
In 3 years, I wouldn't say I've seen much of a change. I mean, you think you've seen a change, and then you realise you haven't. So you know, the peace process gets signed, everyone's celebrating, it's great, and you think, oh, this is a country that's maybe a population that's looking towards reconciling its issues with itself, and then the referendum happens, and oh wait, no, it doesn't. And then it goes through anyway, and Santos gets the Peace Prize. President Santos gets the Nobel Peace Prize, which boosts the process. It goes through, and then there's a kind of another wave of optimism, and then you start seeing social leaders, leftist leaders being killed, and nothing being done to stop it or to bring the killers to justice. You start seeing the conditions in the FARC's demobilization zones, which are essentially refugee camps, which many think is what they deserve, but whatever you think, it's not what was agreed and what was signed between the two sides and ratified by Congress, so it's not how it should be. They should be in proper houses. And I was in a camp, one of their demobilization camps, last week, 2 weeks ago now. 2 weeks ago today, and this one was in Mesetas, in Meta, about 6 hours drive south of here, and they're living in tents still. I mean, this process is supposedly finished. The disarming, demobilizing bit is supposedly finished. Now we're in the reintegration phase. And so for that reason, I don't think I've seen Colombia kind of turn a corner much. I keep seeing it on this kind of on like a record that keeps skipping.
Right. One of the reasons I touched on that was because yesterday, I believe, President Santos was at the UN General Assembly meeting, and there was concern from Donald Trump's comments last week about the eradication of the coca plant, which I think has grown to the highest levels it has for, I think, since the 90s. And there is a feeling that while the peace process has, in inverted commas, finished, or it's a success, the main cause of it is getting out of control when it comes to the actual production of cocaine.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. But that's why this peace process was never going to really tackle the drug trade properly. I mean, when the Medellin and Cali cartels were taken down back in the 90s, that didn't do anything to stop the flow of cocaine to the United States. So when you're dealing with groups as monopolistic as those, and you can't affect the flow of cocaine, then you definitely can't do it with the FARC, who, despite a lot of kind of people's views, are not the major players in the drug trade. I mean, they control a lot of production of the coca crop, but they're not the ones bringing it to market typically. Obviously there are some involved, but there are other groups bringing it to market, which is where much more of the money is made and much more of the violence is committed. So yeah, it's but it is one of those kind of ironies. So you have a big peace process, but it doesn't actually get to the root of the problem, or one of the roots of the problem, which was the money pouring into the conflict, which came from drugs.
It doesn't do what it says on the tin. Just finally, touching on that point about the production and going back to the Venezuela issue, do you think that the exact conflation of problems that you're looking at here with refugees crossing the border and then the explosion of the production of cocoa plant? Do you think that there's a potential that this gets out of control because of a number of factors coming together?
Well, I in a sense, yes. I mean, that's true of any crisis. You add another one, and then you've got an even bigger, an exponential crisis. I don't think that the coca production cultivation will affect in any way the Venezuelan issue, but I think directly. But obviously, if the US is cutting off aid in worst case scenario, then that limits the ability for Colombians to feed themselves or to support themselves, and that then leads to more problems for Venezuelans, less resources for Venezuelans that do arrive. So it could kind of spiral that way, but I don't see like a direct problem that between the two.
Okay. Joe Parkin-Daniels, journalist with the Guardian newspaper and New York Times. Thanks for joining us on Dispatch Colombia today. We'll just have a look at some other stories making the news in Colombia at the moment. According to Colombia reports, following a private meeting with the US National Security Chief John Kelly, President Juan Manuel Santos said on Monday that the United States is fully aware of Colombia's efforts to curb drug trafficking. US President Donald Trump criticized Colombia last week, surprisingly claiming that he had seriously considered to decertify the country as an ally in international counter-narcotics efforts. Colombia's biggest airline, Avianca, is facing a possible strike action by pilots. The airline has already suspended a sale of tickets for September 20th, 21st and 22nd in a row over paying conditions, according to Caracol TV. And a hippopotamus has surprised the inhabitants of Doradal in Antioquia. I should say, according to RCN News, the inhabitants of Doradal managed to record a hippo walking very quietly in the streets of a village next to children and vehicles. The animal escaped for a while from the Hacienda Naples. That's it for Dispatch Colombia. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at dispatchcolombia@gmail.com, or on Twitter you can get in touch at dispatchcolombia at Twitter. That's it for now, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Great. From Bogota, this is Dispatch Colombia. Join the Dispatch Colombia discussion on Twitter at Dispatch Colombia, or email us at dispatchcolombia@gmail.com, and join us again next time.
Transmite desde Colombia y para el mundo entero un